Blood pooled on the linoleum, a brilliant, terrifying red. 5 knife wounds tore through her scrubs, all for a dog that wasn't hers. But what the attacker didn't know was that this wasn't just any dog. It belonged to a Navy SEAL, and tomorrow hell was coming to the hospital. San Diego Mercy Hospital sat just a few miles from the salt-sprayed winds of the Pacific, functioning as a beacon for the broken and the desperate. For 32-year-old Diana Jenkins, the emergency room was a second home. She was a senior triage nurse, known for her unshakable calm and her quiet, relentless empathy. She had seen gunshot wounds, horrific car pileups, and the quiet tragedies of failing hearts, but nothing could have prepared her for the sheer, brutal chaos of a rainy Tuesday night in November. The shift had started with an eerie stillness, the kind of quiet that seasoned ER staff knew better than to trust. At 11:15 p.m., the sliding glass doors violently parted, and paramedics wheeled in a massive, unconscious man. His name was Ryan Corrington. Ryan was a ghost of a man carrying the invisible and visible scars of 3 tours in the Helmand province as a Navy SEAL. A sudden, catastrophic, systemic infection, a complication from an old shrapnel wound, had sent his body into acute septic shock. He was burning up, his blood pressure plummeting, but Ryan hadn't arrived alone. Pacing anxiously beside the gurney, refusing to be corralled by the paramedics, was Titan. Titan was a 70lb Belgian Malinois, a highly decorated military working dog who had saved Ryan's life overseas and now served as his registered service animal in constant shadow. The dog's intelligent amber eyes darted around the brightly lit trauma bay, his muscles coiled tight with stress. He let out a low, vibrating whine as doctors surrounded Ryan's bed, inserting IVs and shouting orders. "He can't stay in the trauma bay." Dr. Harrison Cole barked over the monitor's alarms. "It's a sterile field. Someone get animal control or put him outside." "No." Diana intervened, stepping forward and lowering her voice to a soothing register. She knew the bond between a veteran and his K9. It was forged in fire. "I'll take him. I'm going on my break anyway. I'll keep him in the staff courtyard. He won't be a problem." Dr. Cole nodded curtly, already focused on pushing a massive dose of broad-spectrum antibiotics into Ryan's line. Diana clicked her tongue, and Titan, recognizing her calm authority and perhaps sensing she was a friend, obediently trotted to her side. She led the Malinois out of the chaotic ER and into the enclosed open-air staff courtyard, a small concrete sanctuary surrounded by a high chain-link fence illuminated by a single flickering halogen bulb. The rain had slowed to a heavy mist. Diana sat on a damp metal bench, shivering slightly in her thin blue scrubs, and offered her hand. Titan rested his massive head on her knee, letting out a heavy sigh. "It's okay, buddy," she whispered, stroking the soft fur behind his ears. "He's in good hands." What Diana didn't know was that the danger hadn't arrived in the ambulance. It had followed them. Earlier that afternoon, Ryan had stopped at a local gas station. A known violent transient named Garrett Miller, a man with a rap sheet longer than his arm and a bloodstream currently wired with methamphetamine, had been aggressively harassing a teenage cashier. Ryan, despite his failing health, had intervened. He hadn't thrown a punch. He had simply stood his ground, radiating the kind of lethal, cold authority that only a Tier 1 operator possesses, and told Garrett to walk away. Humiliated and enraged, Garrett had memorized Ryan's license plate. When Ryan collapsed later that evening and the ambulance took him away, Garrett had followed the flashing lights, driven by drug-fueled paranoia and a psychotic need for revenge. Garrett had been lurking in the hospital parking lot for an hour. When he saw Diana lead the magnificent, muscular canine into the dimly lit courtyard, a twisted idea formed in his mind. If he couldn't get to the man who humiliated him, he would take the one thing the man loved. A trained canine that was worth thousands in the underground dog fighting rings, or at the very least, killing it would be the ultimate payback. Diana heard the clatter of the chain-link gate before she saw him. She looked up, expecting a colleague sneaking out for a smoke. Instead, she saw a gaunt man in a soaked hoodie, his eyes blown wide and manic. In his right hand, a 6-inch serrated hunting knife caught the weak light of the halogen bulb. Titan reacted instantly. The dog's training kicked in. He stepped in front of Diana, a deep guttural snarl erupting from his chest, the hair on his back standing on end. "Hey, you can't be back here." Diana shouted, standing up, her heart suddenly hammering against her ribs. "Shut up, bitch." Garrett spat, his voice trembling with erratic energy. He lunged forward, not at Diana, but directly at Titan, slashing the blade toward the dog's neck. Time seemed to fracture into excruciatingly slow fragments. Diana saw the arc of the steel. She knew with absolute certainty that the blade was going to tear through the dog's throat. She didn't think about her safety. Snorts, she didn't think about the fact that this dog wasn't hers. She only saw an innocent creature about to be slaughtered. With a desperate cry, Diana threw herself forward, twisting her body to shield the canine. The impact knocked the breath out of her. It didn't feel like a cut. It felt like being punched with a roll of quarters. Garrett's blade sank deep into the back of her left shoulder. Diana gasped, falling to her knees, dragging Titan down with her to protect him. Garrett, enraged by the interference, lost the last shred of his sanity. He pulled the knife out and drove it down again. 2. The blade slipped between her ribs, narrowly missing her lung. 3. A tearing slash across her lower back. 4. As she rolled over to kick him away, the knife plunged into her abdomen. 5. Another strike to her side, twisting as it exited. Diana collapsed onto the wet concrete, a warm, terrifying dampness spreading rapidly across her scrubs. She couldn't breathe. The pain was a blinding white light exploding in her brain, but Diana's sacrifice had bought the necessary milliseconds. Titan, no longer blocked by Diana's body and seeing his protector fall, unleashed hell. With a terrifying roar, the 7TLB Malinois launched himself into the air, his jaws snapping shut on Garrett's knife-wielding forearm. The crack of bone was loud enough to echo off the brick walls. Garrett screamed, dropping the knife as Titan thrashed his head, tearing muscle and sinew. Panicked, bleeding, and suddenly realizing he was fighting a trained war machine, Garrett kicked wildly, managed to break the dog's grip, and scrambled over the courtyard wall, fleeing into the dark, rainy night, leaving a trail of his own blood behind. Titan didn't pursue him. The dog spun around and immediately dropped to Diana's side. He whined, nudging her pale face with his wet nose, his paws stepping into the growing puddle of red. Diana looked up at the flickering halogen light. Her vision was tunneling, fading to black at the edges. She felt a rough, warm tongue lick the sweat and rain from her cheek. "Good boy," she tried to whisper, but only a wet rattle escaped her lips. The world dissolved into silence. The sound that alerted the hospital wasn't a scream, it was a howl. It was a sound of primal, earth-shattering grief that cut through the sterile hum of the ER charge. Nurse Brenda Walsh was the first to reach the courtyard doors. She pushed them open and froze, her clipboard clattering to the floor. "Code blue, code trauma, courtyard now." Brenda screamed, her voice cracking with hysteria. Dr. Harrison Cole sprinted down the hall, followed by 2 orderlies. What they found would haunt them for the rest of their careers. Diana, their friend, their most dependable nurse, was lying in a massive pool of her own blood. Standing over her, fiercely protective but clearly distressed, was the military dog. "Get the dog away," an orderly yelled, hesitating. "No, he's letting us in." Dr. Cole realized. Titan stepped back, pacing in a tight circle, allowing the medical team to swarm Diana. Multiple stab wounds, chest, abdomen, shoulder. Cole barked, pressing his hands frantically against the most severe wound on her stomach. "She's tachycardic, pulse is thready, get a gurney. Move, move, move." They hauled her onto the stretcher, blood dripping onto the pristine hospital floors as they sprinted toward Trauma Bay 1. The doors slammed shut and a desperate battle for Diana's life began. It took 4 surgeons, massive transfusion protocols, pouring units of O-negative blood into her veins as fast as she was losing it, and a grueling 6-hour surgery to repair her punctured bowel, lacerated liver, and damaged intercostal arteries. At 3:14 a.m., she flatlined. For 20 agonizing seconds, the monitor emitted a solid, piercing tone. Dr. Cole cracked her chest, performing open cardiac massage. By some miracle, a weak rhythm returned. They managed to stabilize her, but just barely. Diana was placed in a medically induced coma, hooked to a ventilator in the ICU, hovering on the razor's edge of death. While Diana fought for her life in the dark, the sun slowly rose over San Diego. In a private room down the hall, the aggressive antibiotics had finally won the war against Ryan Corrigan's sepsis. At 9:00 a.m., the former Navy SEAL opened his eyes. He He felt groggy, weak, and disoriented, but his mind quickly sharpened. He felt the empty space beside his bed. "Titan," Ryan rasped, his voice rough. A nurse sitting in the corner stood up quickly. "Mr. Corrigan, you're awake. Please don't try to move." "Where is my dog?" Ryan demanded, his voice dropping an octave, carrying the terrifying weight of a commanding officer. The door clicked open and the hospital administrator, Richard Hayes, walked in. He looked exhausted, his tie loosened, dark bags under his eyes. Beside him was a local police detective. "Mr. Corrington," Hayes said softly, "your dog is fine, he's safe, but there was an incident last night." Over the next 10 minutes, Ryan listened in absolute silence. He didn't interrupt. He didn't show shock. He simply stared at the blank wall opposite his bed as the administrator explained how a man had broken into the courtyard. How the man had tried to kill his dog, and how a nurse named Diana Jenkins had thrown herself in front of the blade, taking 5 mortal wounds meant for Titan. "She's in the ICU," Hayes finished, his voice breaking slightly. We don't know if she's going to make it." Ryan slowly turned his head to look at the detective. "Do you have the man who did this?" "Not yet," the detective admitted nervously. "We've got blood from the courtyard. The dog bit him pretty bad. We're running it through the system. We're checking local clinics for anyone treating a severe dog bite, but so far nothing. He's a ghost. I want to see Titan and I want to see her," Ryan said. It wasn't a request. Despite the protests of the medical staff, Ryan forced himself into a wheelchair. He was wheeled down the quiet, sterile corridors to the ICU. Outside Diana's glass-walled room, Titan was lying on the floor, his nose pressed against the glass. He hadn't slept. He hadn't eaten. When Titan saw Ryan, he let out a soft whimper and rested his heavy head on Ryan's lap. Ryan reached down, his strong, calloused hands gently stroking the dog's neck. His snorts felt something crusty on Titan's collar. He looked at his fingers. It was dried blood, Diana's blood. Ryan looked through the glass at the young woman connected to a dozen tubes and machines, her face pale as porcelain. A woman who had never met him, who had no obligation to his dog, had sacrificed everything. A cold, terrifying stillness settled over Ryan. It was the same stillness he felt in the belly of a C-130 Hercules before jumping into a hostile combat zone. It was absolute, unwavering resolve. "Get me my phone," Ryan told his nurse. "Sir, you need to rest. Get me my phone." The nurse swallowed hard and handed him his personal belongings bag. Ryan pulled out his cell phone, his hand steady despite the lingering weakness in his body. He dialed a number he hadn't called in 3 years. It rang twice. "Corrington," a deep voice answered on the other end. It was Commander Thomas Reynolds, the commanding officer of Naval Special Warfare Group 1, based just across the bridge in Coronado. "Tom," Ryan said softly, his voice devoid of emotion. "I'm at Mercy Hospital." "I know," Reynolds replied. "We got word you went into septic shock. The guys were planning to come down this afternoon to give you hell for scaring us. You good?" "I'm alive," Ryan said, "but someone tried to kill Titan last night." There was a profound silence on the line. Every SEAL knew Titan. Titan was a legend. "Is the dog alive?" Reynolds, his voice suddenly hard. "He's alive because a triage nurse took the blade for him, a stranger. She took 5 stab wounds, Tom. She bled out on the concrete, saving my dog." Ryan looked through the glass at Diana's rising and falling chest. "She's dying in the room in front of me." Another heavy silence. "The police?" Reynolds finally asked. "They have nothing. They're waiting for lab results. The guy who did this is out there and he knows where we are." Ryan paused. "She didn't have to do it, Tom. She's one of us." "Understood," Reynolds said quietly. It was a single word, but it carried the weight of an entire military doctrine. "We take care of our own. Give me 24 hours. The line clicked dead. Ryan lowered the phone, his hand resting on Titan's head. Inside the Coronado Naval Base, the gears of a massive, unspoken brotherhood were already beginning to turn. Text messages were sent. Group chats lit up. A silent alarm rippled through the ranks of the most elite war fighters on the planet. The message was simple. One of ours is down. The one who saved him needs us. The 24-hour countdown had begun. Across the Coronado Bridge, the United States Naval Special Warfare Command was normally a hub of structured, disciplined chaos. But on this Wednesday morning, a different kind of energy pulsed through the barracks and training facilities. It was an unsanctioned, quiet, and terrifyingly efficient mobilization. The word had spread through encrypted group texts and hushed conversations in the armory. Titan was attacked. A civilian nurse took 5 blades to the chest to save him. The local PD has no leads. For the men of Naval Special Warfare Group 1, this wasn't just an unfortunate local crime. It was an attack on their own. Titan was a decorated veteran, a dog who had sniffed out IEDs in the dusty valleys of Afghanistan, saving dozens of American lives. And Diana Jenkins, the woman bleeding out in the intensive care unit at Mercy Hospital, had Snorts just earned a permanent blood-sworn place in their brotherhood. Chief Petty Officer Brody Mitchell, a 14-year veteran and top-tier reconnaissance specialist, took point. He didn't wear his uniform. He swapped his camouflage for faded jeans, a plain black t-shirt, and a dark jacket that concealed the rugged, heavily muscled frame of a man who spent his life preparing for war. He wasn't the only one. Across San Diego, off-duty SEALs were signing out, grabbing their civilian keys and disappearing into the city. They weren't acting as active-duty military. Posse Comitatus laws strictly forbade that. They were acting as highly motivated, exceptionally dangerous, concerned citizens. Mitchell gathered 4 of his closest squad mates in the back booth of a quiet diner in Chula Vista. He threw a printed photograph on the table. It was a blurry still from a gas station security camera procured by a friend at the police department. It showed Garrett Miller harassing the cashier just hours before the attack. The PD ran facial recognition, but this guy is a ghost. No fixed address. Known associate of the local meth rings, Mitchell said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. But here's the kicker. Ryan said Titan got a hold of him. A 7TLB Malinois doesn't just bite, it crushes. This guy has a shattered arm, massive tissue damage, and he's losing blood. He can't go to an ER, said a sniper named Miller, tracing the rim of his coffee mug. The hospitals are all flagged by the police. Anyone coming in with a severe dog bite gets handcuffed to the bed. Exactly, Mitchell nodded, his eyes cold and focused. Which means he's looking for an underground fix, a back alley vet, a pill mill doctor, or he's holed up in a trap house trying to superglue himself together. We shake the trees. We find the rat. Over the next 12 hours, the Shadow Network went to work. The SEALs utilized informants they had developed over years of living in the gritty underbelly of Southern California. They walked into dive bars in Barrio Logan, slipped $100 bills to corner lookouts, and paid unannounced visits to known drug dens. They didn't threaten. They didn't shout. They simply stood in doorways, imposing and unmovable, asking a single question. Where is the guy with the crushed arm? Meanwhile, back at Mercy Hospital, the air in the ICU was thick with dread. Diana's vital signs were a terrifying roller coaster. At 2:00 p.m., her blood pressure bottomed out again. Dr. Harrison Cole and his team rushed in, pushing vasopressors and adjusting her ventilator. Outside the glass, Ryan Corrington sat in his wheelchair, an IV pole trailing behind him. He hadn't returned to his own room. He refused to eat. Titan lay curled beneath his chair, his amber eyes fixed unblinkingly on the sliding glass door of Diana's room. Charge nurse Brenda Walsh walked over carrying a styrofoam cup of black coffee. She handed it to Ryan, her hands trembling slightly. "She's a fighter, Mr. Corrington," Brenda said softly, looking at the pale face of her friend through the glass. "Diana, she's the strongest person I know. She fostered stray dogs. She worked double shifts so the junior nurses could go home to their kids. She didn't deserve this." "No, she didn't," Ryan replied, his voice rough with exhaustion and suppressed rage. He looked down at Titan. "I owe her a debt I can never repay. You don't owe us anything," Brenda whispered, wiping a tear from her cheek. "That's exactly why I owe her," Ryan stated flatly. "I spent my life protecting this country. Yesterday, this country protected me." As the sun began to set, painting the San Diego sky in bruised shades of purple and orange, Chief Mitchell's burner phone vibrated. He pulled his truck over to the curb in the industrial district near the shipyards. "Speak," Mitchell said. "Got him." A voice crackled over the line. It was an off-duty medic from Team 3. Squatters camped down by the old cannery on Harbor Drive. Second floor of a condemned warehouse. The local runner says a guy matching the description stumbled in a few hours ago begging for painkillers and screaming about a demon dog. Arm is black from infection. Copy that, Mitchell said. He hung up the phone and looked in his rearview mirror. Behind his truck, 3 other unmarked SUVs pulled up to the curb. "Let's go bag the garbage." Garrett Miller was burning alive from the inside out. He lay on a filthy, stained mattress in the corner of a rotting warehouse, shivering violently despite the sweat pouring down his gaunt face. His right arm was a grotesque, swollen mass of torn flesh and shattered bone wrapped tightly in a blood-soaked t-shirt. The pain was blinding, a constant sickening throb that made his vision swim. He reached with his left hand for a half-empty bottle of cheap whiskey Snorts, desperate for anything to dull the agony. He never got to take a sip. The heavy steel door of the warehouse unit didn't just open. It exploded inward, torn off its rusted hinges by a battering ram. Garrett screamed, scrambling backward against the brick wall like a cornered rat. Through the dust and the dim light of the street lamps filtering through broken windows, figures moved into the room. They didn't wear badges. They didn't wear police uniforms. They were 6 massive, broad-shouldered men dressed in dark civilian clothes, moving with a terrifying synchronized silence. They didn't draw weapons. They didn't need to. The sheer predatory aura radiating from them was enough to suck the oxygen out of the room. Chief Mitchell stepped out of the shadows, his face in an emotionless mask. He looked down at the pathetic, bleeding man on the mattress. He saw the savage bite marks on Garrett's arm, the undeniable snort signature of a Tier 1 military working dog. "Please," Garrett sobbed, his bravado entirely gone, replaced by the primal terror of a man looking at apex predators. "Please, I need a hospital." "You're going to get one," Mitchell said quietly. Snorts. 2 of the men stepped forward. They didn't beat him. They didn't torture him. They operated with a chilling clinical precision. They hauled Garrett to his feet by his uninjured arm, zip-tied his wrists with agonizing tightness, and dragged him out of the warehouse. 20 minutes later, a black SUV rolled to a stop directly in front of the San Diego Police Department's Central Precinct. The rear door slid open. Garrett Miller, sobbing and hyperventilating, was unceremoniously dumped onto the concrete steps. Beside him, Mitchell dropped a thick manila folder. It contained Garrett's rap sheet, high-resolution photos of the gas station surveillance, and a clear plastic evidence bag containing a bloody piece of fabric torn from Garrett's hoodie found snagged on the hospital courtyard fence. By the time the desk sergeant ran outside to investigate the noise, the black SUV was already vanishing down the street, melting back into the shadows of the city. The hunt was over, but the true display of power was just beginning. The next morning at exactly 800 hours, the San Diego Mercy Hospital parking lot went dead silent. Administrator Richard Hayes was standing by the 4th-floor window of his office nursing a cup of tea when he saw them. He froze, his teacup halfway to his mouth. Rolling slowly down the main avenue leading to the hospital was a convoy. There were no sirens, no flashing lights, just Snorts, a steady, endless stream of dark trucks, SUVs, and motorcycles. They pulled into the massive visitor parking lot, taking up row after row in perfect disciplined alignment. Out of the vehicles stepped men, dozens of them, then 100, then 200. They were all off-duty Navy SEALs, Special Warfare Combatant Craft crewmen, SWCC, and support staff from the Coronado base. They wore plain clothes, jeans, boots, jackets, but they moved Snorts as one unified entity. They didn't march, but their footsteps echoed like thunder across the asphalt. They walked toward the hospital entrance and stopped. They didn't block the ambulance bays. They didn't impede the medical staff. They simply fanned out, creating a massive silent perimeter around the hospital courtyard where Diana had fallen. Inside the ICU, the rhythmic beep of Diana's heart monitor continued its steady pace. Ryan Corrington, sitting in his wheelchair by the glass, looked up as Commander Thomas Reynolds walked into the ward. Reynolds placed a heavy hand on Ryan's shoulder. "It's done," Reynolds said softly. "The police have the suspect. He's looking at attempted murder, aggravated assault, and a federal charge for attacking a registered military service animal. He's never seeing the sky again." Ryan nodded slowly, the tension in his jaw finally relaxing. "Thank you, Tom. Look out the window, brother." Reynolds replied, pointing toward the large bay window at the end of the ICU hallway. Ryan wheeled himself over, Titan trotting faithfully at his side. He looked down into the courtyard and the parking lot beyond. He saw his brothers, 200 of the most lethal men on Earth, standing in absolute reverent silence in the crisp morning air. They stood with their hands clasped in front of them, their eyes fixed on the fourth-floor windows of the intensive care unit. It was a vigil. It was a guard of honor. It was a message to the world that the woman fighting for her life in that room was no longer just a civilian nurse. She was under the protection of the United States Navy. The news crews arrived an hour later, their cameras panning over the surreal, breathtaking sight. The nurses on the floor wept openly, pressing their hands against the glass. The sheer emotional weight of the gathering pressed down on the hospital, wrapping the building in an unbreakable shield of respect and gratitude. They stood there for 12 hours. They stood through the afternoon sun, and they stood as the evening chill set in. They only began to disperse one by one, fading away into the night when word finally came down from the fourth floor. At 7:45 p.m., the alarms in Diana's room stayed quiet. Her fever had broken. The swelling in her abdomen had subsided. Diana Jenkins slowly fluttered her eyes open. The light above her was blindingly bright. Her throat felt like it was filled with broken glass, and her body felt like it had been crushed under a concrete block. She blinked rapidly, trying to clear the fog of the anesthesia. Slowly, the blurry shapes in the room came into focus. Dr. Cole was checking her monitors, a massive smile breaking across his exhausted face. Brenda Walsh was crying openly at the foot of her bed, but it was the figure seated to her right that drew her attention. A large, scarred man in a hospital gown sitting in a wheelchair. Beside him, resting his massive head gently on the edge of Diana's mattress, was the Belgian Malinois. Titan let out a soft, vibrating whine, his tail thumping once against the floor. He gently nudged Diana's limp hand with his cold nose. Diana managed a weak, agonizingly small smile. Her fingers twitched, brushing against the dog's soft ears. "You're okay," Diana rasped, her voice barely a whisper. Ryan leaned forward, tears pooling in the eyes of a man who hadn't cried in a decade. "He is because of you." Ryan reached out and gently laid his calloused hand over hers. "My name is Ryan. This is Titan. And I want you to know, Diana, as long as you live, you will never have to face the dark alone again. You have 200 brothers waiting outside, and we never forget." Diana closed her eyes, a single tear slipping down her cheek. Finally safe. The nightmare was over. The storm had passed, leaving behind a bond forged in blood and steel, unbreakable for the rest of their lives. Diana's incredible bravery proves that heroes don't always wear uniforms. Sometimes they wear hospital scrubs. The bond between a veteran, his K9, and the community that stands behind them is unbreakable. If this story of sacrifice, brotherhood, and silent justice moved you, please hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more incredible real-life stories. Snorts, let's honor true heroes together.